Welcome into the Grace Point Daily Podcast. My name is Jeremiah Johnson. We exist to bring you daily encouragement for your daily walk with Christ. As usual, this is a verse-by-verse episode with none other than Dr. R.B. Maynard. Do you need a doctor? Have you been to the doctor lately? Well, now you're going to go today to Dr. R.B. Maynard. How are you, sir?
Yeah. Don't call in with your ailments and ask me to help you. So,
Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Dr. R.B. Maynard.
Yep. Not necessarily in that order either.
Well, we were talking about dating before the show started here, Dr. R.B. Those days are, well, no, not long gone for me, Dr. R.B. Maynard, but not for you.
3 days or 3 years passed for me.
So, yeah, he probably still has that Christian Mingle account active, and forgot to log out and turn it off.
I don't think that's there, but...
Anyway, the whole point is maybe you've listened to our show and it's kind of like you're dating, but it's time to commit to the Grace Point Daily Podcast.
Right.
Commit to listening each and every week. That's where I'm getting to. And then secondly, Dr. R.B. Maynard, haven't really expressed this to you, but my guy, LeBron James, championship number 4, LA Lakers championship number 17, tied with the Boston Celtics all time.
Yeah.
It was a good week. Good week for me.
Good week for you. I don't care. So.
Yeah. So Steph Curry's been sitting at home for quite a long time now.
He has. I don't know if he can come back or not.
He's been sitting on the shelf for a while, those guys. So see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see.
But far much more exciting and better than all that stuff is the Word, the Word of God, the Bible, which we're going to get into. 1 Kings chapter 18.
Chapter 18, verse 43. This is, again, following the prophets of Baal that have all been killed. And, of course, that was all about rain. There'd been a famine, and so they're begging for rain. And so verse 43 and 44 says, this is Elijah, "Go and look toward the sea," he told his servant, and he went up and looked. "There's nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." So this is, you could ask that question. It seems like if you're using this as a prayer time or whatever, it's like begging God almost. I mean, go back 7 times, and the servant must have thought, "There's nothing there. Why go back?" It's kind of like, why would I go get prayed for again? Yeah. I've already been prayed for 7 times, and so it's that same principle. But it's like, just go back and look again. Go back and look again, and then there's always that question: was it a cloud actually the size of a man's fist or hand, they say, or was it a perspective? In other words, if you were to go out and there's some cloud off in the distance and your hand is up close, if you put your hand up, you could cover that cloud that maybe is miles wide. So there's a thing about perspective there, and I always tell the story about perspective with the kids in school. And the teacher gives them an assignment to go out in their backyard and count the stars. And so they come back the next day, and she says to one of the kids, "Well, how many stars did you count?" She said, "I counted 10,000 stars." And she said, "Man, that's really good." So she goes out and asks the other little girl, "Did you go out in your backyard and count stars?" "Yeah." She said, "How many stars did you count?" 500. And she said, "How is it that you counted 500 and she counted 10,000? And she said, "Her backyard must be bigger."
Yeah.
So it's perspective sometimes. So
less light pollution.
Yeah. So I don't know how it was, whether it was a big cloud in the distance, but Elijah has said there's a sound of a heavy rain. So somehow, I don't know if it's thundering in the distance and he can hear it, but apparently nobody else can hear what's going on. Maybe God gave him a exceptional hearing to know that something was coming. And Elijah, knowing who Elijah is, he probably knows, hey, I prayed, it's going to happen. And some of the healing ministers, you've been around long enough maybe to see some of the, I don't know what to say, circus
theatrical.
Right. I mean, I've heard people say, well, go do this, or just lift your hand that you couldn't lift before, or and I've heard all the scams and
the only one I've ever been really skeptical of, not even the gold dust. I don't mind the gold dust, a little bit of gold dust here and there. The one I was at in Mexico at a revival, and everyone, the evangelist was everyone had a shorter leg than the other leg. You've seen that one before?
Right. Yes.
Like, it was a centimeter shorter, and then, there it is.
Yep. I know. There's
every person. It wasn't just like, I get if like,
right.
Hey, you got a shorter leg. He's, we all deal with different physical issues, ailments, but everyone had a shorter leg than the other leg.
Well, I'm not making fun, but in the area of healing, I've heard preachers stand up and preach that, God wants you to be divine health, not one thing wrong. Your body should be perfect, all of those kind of things. And they're wearing glasses. So it's like, I guess God can heal everything but your eyes.
Yeah.
Or, and I don't mean to be, I'm not saying that a healing,
old.
I'm not saying that a healing evangelist can't wear glasses or he's not legitimate. I don't mean that. But if you're going to proclaim something so adamant, then, your life, you better be in perfect health if you're going to talk. So we're not talking about healing necessarily. We're just talking about that repetitive coming back. Go look again to see this. So 45 and 46 says, meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose. A heavy rain came on, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. This is 16 miles. So it's not like, it's just down the pathway a little bit, and he was able to outrun a chariot with horses. I mean, this is a miraculous. I mean, can you imagine? I just think about Ahab riding along in his chariot, and he tells him to hurry up and get out of there because it's going to rain. So I imagine he's going at a pretty good clip, and all of a sudden he looks down, and Elijah passes him, running down the road. Now it'd be like driving your car down the road, and all of a sudden, some guy goes flying by just running.
Yeah.
I mean,
Usain Bolt.
Yeah.
Captain America. Black Panther.
Miraculous power from God. We know those are godly blessed men. But anyway, 16 miles. So it's not a little sprint. I mean, this is a marathon kind of thing.
Yeah. Between a half and a full, right? In the middle.
Yeah. So
maybe it was Kenyan.
Yeah. They always win it all, it seems like. So, but all of this from a cloud the size of a man's hand. So again, if you were talking about this in the miraculous sense, which it is miraculous, but if you're looking at that, it all comes from something that seems so small. A prayer that you didn't use all the big fancy words. You didn't pray for an hour for someone's healing. You just say, be healed, and they're healed. I mean, those kind of things. We think that the length of our prayers, the intensity of our prayers. I've seen someone with a busting headache, and somebody just walk by and lay their hand on them and never, and just say Jesus, and they were healed. I mean, so it's not all about the theatrics or whatever, but this all came from something very small. And Elijah's running this, not race necessarily, but he's passing this guy. Elijah's not a young guy. I mean, we don't have what his age is here. And not only that, he's not like these guys with these body suits that run. And, I mean, he's tucking his robe up into his belt so that it frees up his legs to run. So anyway, it is quite the miracle that happens here. So chapter 19:1, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So he's probably there telling her the story, telling her the details of everything that's happened. And, she probably could have said, why didn't you kill him? Because that's what she really wanted. Why did you let him, go through all this process when all you had to do was shoot him? It's kind of like, I always kind of laugh in the movies where, they have somebody at gunpoint and then they leave them there and they say, now, kill the guy when I'm gone. And then they mess around. And then finally the guy escapes. And it's like, all it took was a split second to shoot him and it would all be over. But,
or I'm going to shoot you on the count of 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then something happens.
I don't know. It's just, anyway, it's crazy. But she could have been asking, why didn't you kill him? And we know Ahab is henpecked. He's a guy, he's scared to death of Jezebel, scared to death of his own wife. reminds me of you a lot.
Yeah. Yes.
You do what Rachel says to do. I get that.
Yeah.
So for those of you out there that know, that would be a good example for you to follow. So 19:2. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make you like one of them." So she's swearing, of course, by her gods, and she's just heard this miraculous story. And I guess we can look at this. We can say, how can people be like that? But it is with YouTube and everything that we have today. We can see those instances where you can tell somebody the facts of the way things are, and they'll say, "Well, I just don't believe that." And it's like, how can you? I'm showing you this, whatever it is. I'm showing you that this person actually said this because here's the recording and all that. Well, I just don't. I think that's out of context, or I think that's And so Jezebel, after hearing everything, you thought she would have been afraid.
Yeah.
Really, of what Elijah could do to her. But instead, she's swearing by the very God, Baal. Mm-hmm. She's swearing by Baal that if by this time tomorrow you're not dead, may you take my life if I don't take your life, kind of thing. Yeah. She's still trusting in Baal. She's just basically, well, you haven't proven anything to me. How could you kill 450 prophets of Baal after they had just been through, and Ahab was there watching all of this, if they'd been through what they've been through, and she still is serving Baal.
Yeah.
And part of the issue probably is, for her, if she's looking at her god Baal and probably thinking, well, that doesn't mean that your God's greater, because that just means that those 450 prophets were martyrs for their God. So it still makes Baal seem like he's something great, and these guys just showed their faithfulness by being martyred for the cause. So in her eyes, she could be thinking, well, this just makes Baal look better because now people are willing to die for Baal. Mm-hmm. So things can get twisted in all kinds of different ways, but excuse me. And did she not know who he was? Had she not heard the stories? He's a prophet of God. He's a hero in people's eyes. At Cherith, he was provided water and food by the ravens that we've talked about before. He raised a boy from the dead. He called down fire from heaven. All of these things that he had done, and you would think, and again, we've said this before, under the circumstances, you would think that Elijah would be so full of faith because of all these things that he has seen. You would think that there would be nothing that could intimidate him in these circumstances. Yeah. But he's about to be running for his life. It's just, and we can say it's amazing, but I've always said our faith is only as big as our last miracle, because we tend to forget. I'm sure you saw miracles with Gabrielle, but there's probably been times since then that you've prayed and felt like God wasn't answering, or you tend to forget. If something would have happened right after that miracle, while your faith is fresh, then it's easy to believe for the next miracle. But when it's been, how old is she? 15, 16?
Going on 17.
She's going on 17? Oh, my goodness.
December. Woo.
Man. I wish I was going on 17. But, 17 years ago, that was fresh in your mind, and your faith is built. But 17 years later, when something happens, you have to almost make yourself sometimes go back and remember, okay, I remember what God did back then. God can still do miracles, and you have to remind yourself because it's not fresh in your mind. Yep. And so even with these great miracles that he's seen, it's been a little while, a few days probably is all it's been for him, and he begins to lose heart. It says, 19:3 and 4, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree where he sat down under it and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. I mean, this is after all those things we just mentioned, all the miracles that he had seen. He's a prophet of God. God has probably spoken to him with an audible voice, and now he runs for his life from a woman. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not even Ahab, really. He's running from Jezebel. So, and I'm not saying we don't want your phone calls that I'm trying to say women can't be intimidating.
Yeah.
Again, look at your wife. I mean, Pastor Rachel and the way she intimidates you, just look at and the facts are right before us here. So, but take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. I mean, he has forgotten all of those things himself that he has just seen happen in his very recent past, that he's seen all those miracles. It hasn't been 17 years since the last miracle or whatever.
Well, and I'd even just pause to say this, is that the older I get, the more believable the Bible is. And what I mean from that perspective is, what we're talking about right now is like him in this moment of, oh man, I just want to die. Oh my goodness. Like, man, I've been there in ministry before where like you've gone through battles and been in it for a while, and then, but you still have the days where you're like, oh, I'm scared. I don't want to do this anymore, or lack faith, I mean, it's very minimal. One thing, our church right now, we're at Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames, and we're going to do the remodel project. And as a pastor, I'm very, in some minutes in the day or moments, I get worried about that. I'm like, oh man, what if this isn't good? Like, I don't know. And it's like, oh yeah, come on, Jeremiah, you just got to slap yourself a little bit, but it's just a natural process that we go through, that we continue to go through. As great as the that you're talking about LeBron James, I mean, true great players, they win one championship, and the day after, that feeling's already gone from the great victory, and now it's like, oh, now I want another one, or it's just a it's a human thing,
right?
Even in our faith,
we forget that people are human. I mean, we think that those great people of God that have seen the miracles and maybe had the healings in their own life and all of those we just forget that they are still human, and all of the emotions and all of those things. I mean, that is the very reason that Jesus came, because he had those feelings too. He knows when you have that feeling. I think Jesus. I mean, who knows how things are, but if he sits around and it's like, yeah, I get it, Jeremiah.
Yeah.
I've had my moments.
Yep.
And you have to bring yourself back to reality and realize who God is. But the thing is, we forget too that when you're the person going through whatever it is, sickness, depression, discouragement, whatever it is, when you're going through that, it's very hard. I've always said I need people to pray for me, because lots of times I can't pray for myself. I'm going through that time of unbelief or whatever it may be in my life, or I've talked to people with the coronavirus and different things that are like, man, I am so sick and I'm in bed and I can't, I've been really sick before, and when I'm really sick, I can't get on my knees next to the bed and just cry out to the Lord because I'm just too sick to think about anything but feeling better. That's all that's on my mind. Every moment I wake, I want to feel better. And so that's really why we need people praying for us, because of the fact that I can't pray for myself sometimes. I don't know. I don't have the words. I don't have the, I'm human.
Yep. And
so, this is a phrase, I don't even know who this quote is, but it says, if you will break the bow if you keep it always bent. If you're always, we're talking about Elijah here is tired. That's what this is all about. He's burned out, and I think this, if I were going to preach a sermon about pastor appreciation, about things like that, you have to talk about the idea of burnout. That's why they talk about sabbaticals.
Right, right.
I think the suggestion is every 5 to 7 years or something that a pastor needs a sabbatical. I don't think there's it has to be this many days
right.
or whatever, but he needs a break and a refreshing time, because I don't care how big the church is.
Yeah.
You're on duty 24 hours a day. And people they think, well, we pay him, but he only comes, the old joke is you only have to preach maybe three times a week, Wednesday, Sunday morning, Sunday night. Then if you have somebody else preach, then it's 2 times or 1 time. Well, what's the big deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they don't realize, I use the example, when I was a paramedic, I worked a 24-hour shift. And there were times that I got to sleep all night. We didn't have a call.
Mm-hmm.
And we could. It wasn't like I was, cheating the system by taking a nap or something. That was part of it. But I didn't make much money per hour. And people would make that statement, well, yeah, but you get to sleep all night.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, but you know what? In the back of my mind, if you're the guy who's having a heart attack at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm the guy who's got to get out of bed and come out there. So I'm worth a ton of money to you if I'm the guy coming to save your life. And so it's the same thing with a pastor. You're on call 24 hours a day, and you may or may not get a phone call in the middle of the night. But it's about, the fatigue sometimes is not about physical fatigue. You go and run and ride a bike and stuff to try to stay in shape, but sometimes the mental issues are, we talked about in Sunday school the other day, Mike Pickering has worked at H.E. Williams 47 years.
Wow.
Now, there's, I don't want to work in a factory. I'm not belittling that. I think that's awesome that he's done that.
Yeah.
And that dedication and stuff. I don't want to do that. But he has stuck with that for 47 years.
So literally right out of high school then?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
Jeez.
And I think Rodney has been 30-some years with Schreiber's, So,
wow.
So these guys that have stayed with that, but the difference is for, like with your job as a pastor or me when I was a paramedic for that 24-hour shift, I had to think about that all the time. You have to think about your pastoral role all the time. When you have a factory job, and again, this is not belittling that,
no.
But when you have a factory job, when you go home at 3:30, you don't. Most, I would say, anyway. Mike can call us and tell us different, but you don't go home worried about the job. You clock out at 3:30 in the morning, and you're free, or 3:30 in the afternoon, I guess, but 3:30 in the afternoon till 7 a.m. the next morning, you are free of that job. They're not calling you because you're an assembly line person, or they're not calling you for advice, or you're not on call 24 hours a day. Most of them are not working a weekend, so. So anyway, there is a certain amount of fatigue that's mental.
High stress jobs.
Right.
Also the stress of.
Right.
I still love a pastor. I literally think this is a good idea, but I'm sure if you pitched it to some people, it'd sound really, but there was a pastor who had served the church, wasn't like I don't even know if it was a large church, but in Utah, and he had been there for 20 some years, just solid church, great pastor, in the community, etc. But he credited that longevity to he would take a month off every year.
Yeah.
And he would go, he got like a cabin just nearby. I think there's a lake or something. I think that was Bear Lake or something. Anyway, he would go to that cabin for a month and just reset, recharge, refocus. And he really attributed that to just a time of resetting. And he's like, that's why I was able to endure all those years. Like if I didn't do it, I probably would have, after 3-4 years, I probably would have, okay, time for the next one. But anyway,
yeah. Well,
subtle hint. No, just my cottage in Arkansas.
Right. The truth in your mind. Well, I just want to read this. This is interesting because it's Charles Spurgeon. So it would be in our day thinking, about the more recent heroes, I guess, of the time. Spurgeon would be one of those, and it says, the times most favorable to fits of depression so far as I have experienced. So in other words, right off the bat, he's saying, I have experienced times of depression. I mean, that's we think, oh, pastors are, the joy of the Lord's there. They don't struggle with depression, anxiety, any of those kind of things. But he says, so far as I have experienced, may be summed up in a brief catalog. First among them, I must mention the hour of great success, when at a last long-cherished desire is fulfilled, when God has glorified greatly by our means, and a great triumph achieved, then we were apt to faint. It might be imagined that amid special favors, our soul would soar to the heights of ecstasy and rejoice with joy unspeakable, but is generally the reverse. The Lord seldom exposes his warriors to the perils of exultation over victory. He knows that few of them can endure such a test, and therefore dashes their cup with bitterness. Excess of joy or excitement must be paid for by subsequent depressions. While the trial lasts, the strength is equal to the emergency, but when it's over, natural weakness claims the right to show itself. Before any great achievement, some measure of the same depression is very usual. So, that idea of having all these great things happen in your life, and then comes the fit of depression.
Yeah.
Or, it's just...
Jim Ayers, that was at our church this last year. He pastored a very large church, borderline mega church. He's a baller and a shot caller and all that good stuff. No, just tremendous minister. And he had depression, literal depression.
Right.
Had medicinal treatment for it. I mean, because of ministry, he battled through it. But
and I've known that.
And he's great, and that he's a greater than I am.
I don't know. I'm not going to name a name because I'm not that familiar with everything, but I do know a pastor of a large church that struggled with that same thing, and the church helped him through that, and and things were good. I mean, it was a growing church, a phenomenal church, but he was struggling, and he came through it. The church, instead of saying, well, if you can't fulfill your pastoral duties, we need to find somebody else, which is, unfortunately, that's
praise God for that church.
What happens sometimes.
Yes.
But instead they should say, we're going to do everything we can to help you through this, and you're still our pastor, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that all the time. But Moses did the same. That's the thing about it. We look at these guys. Moses did the same thing. After all he had seen and everything else, he was ready to die.
I think one other comment here is not to take us off the tracks, hopefully, but I think there's just and not to just say a pastor, because sometimes, again,
right,
a lot of us aren't pastors of churches, and that doesn't make me special because I am one. But I would just say simply to whatever God has called you to do, because we all have one. We all have a calling, an individual calling to participate in the kingdom work and God's ministry here on earth. But there is a weight to that. There's a weight to that you take on, and you should feel it. You should feel it. Not hopefully. Jesus said, "Come to me. Let me take it off you." But you should feel it. You should feel it's there, and there should be a sensitivity to that, to be like, "Wow, what God has called me to do is great," and there should be a feeling of like, "I must accomplish this. I must do this." That should be there. Right. If it's not there, you should, let me go back to a basketball illustration. It's like the LA Clippers, who were supposed to win the championship this year. They interviewed one of their players after they lost and choked in the second round. They're like, well, the goal wasn't really to win a championship this year. And, could you, when I heard that, I was like, wow, no wonder you didn't, someone like LeBron James, again, an example you and I will never be able to relate to in that context, but this weight to like, I have to, if I don't win the championship every year, people are going to talk bad about me. They're going to, but bring it back to spiritually is that, there should be this weight we carry around with each day regarding what God has called us to do. And a little bit of this feeling that's like, wow, I have to do this. And that ultimately should then put us into trusting the Lord, relying on the Lord, right? Because we can't do it on our own, Right. So old Philippians 4:13, with God, I can do all things through Christ Jesus. I can do all things with Christ, right? Amplified says, but anyway,
right. Well, I've always said it'd be a whole lot easier. I mean, being a Christian is not easy because our flesh, I think it was T.D. Jakes said at one time, your flesh doesn't get saved. Your soul gets saved. Yep. Your flesh doesn't get saved. And so we still struggle with fleshly desires and temptations and all of those things. So just to give in to those is the easy way. So fighting against the flesh is not easy. I could get lazy, and it's like, this is just too much trouble. It's too much trouble to podcast. It's too much trouble to, it'd be easier to get up in the morning with not thinking about, I need to study, I need to read, or I need to pray, or the things that Christians do. I mean, I love the church, but there are a lot of people who love the weekend. They have 2 days of the lake and, of doing whatever they want to do. And especially if you work in the church. Now, if you just show up sometimes, then it's pretty easy to go to church. But for those who are coming here, they're taking care of other people's children. I mean, you're studying to preach a sermon. You're putting music together. There is some labor to it. I mean, even though you may love it, there's still some labor to it. And so, absolutely. So anyway, we'll finish up here. But Moses had that fear. Jonah, wanted to die. I mean, Paul talks about, he said he was despaired of life. I mean, it was like everybody, I think, has a breaking point somewhere. Yeah. And some go through and they don't appear to have any kind of struggle. We've talked about Brother Graham on this podcast a lot. Brother Graham was pretty peaceful, but I knew him. I'm not saying I knew him better than anybody else, but I knew him in a different context sometimes, and I saw the heartache and the hurt and stuff coming from him sometimes that he covered, where people just thought Brother Graham was just a man of peace, who never struggled with anyone, who never had a bad thought about anyone or whatever. And it's not the truth, because the stress of the job is so great, and especially for people who want to. I mean, we can say all we want to. I don't care what anybody thinks, but that's not the truth. If it was, you'd wear your old shabby clothes. You'd never get your hair cut. You'd be, if you truly didn't care what people think, you wouldn't. When you did a sermon, you just do whatever you want to. You wouldn't think about well, what's going to benefit people. Where are people at in their life? What's the culture like right now? I mean, there's lots of pressures there that we do care, and we should care what people think. But the fear comes from not thinking realistically or clearly. We have to consider the source. There are times that as a pastor, as a teacher, as a board member, whatever, you have to take things with a grain of salt, or what we say, consider the source. Because there are people who might come to me and say, hey, I was just wondering about this, or would it be better if we did such and so, or whatever. And I might be, I never thought of that. That's a good idea. But then there are people who would come to me and it's like, you're never at church. You don't put money in. You're not even a member of the church to take the responsibility of voting on a huge building project or anything like that. I'm going to consider this the source. I wrote, somebody said, when a mule kicks you, you don't get mad. You just consider the source. I mean, you can get mad at the animal, but hey, mules kick. So you consider the source sometimes. And then his other problem was he separated himself from people who would strengthen him. I mean, he goes off by himself. He doesn't even take his servant. He says, I need to be alone. And we all do. I mean, there's times I just need to be just leave me alone for a minute. I just need to work this out. I don't need you to tell me how to solve my problem. Just leave me alone. I need some, not all, this is a terrible thing to say probably, but not all depression is bad, because sometimes that depressed feeling will draw you into a more intimate relationship with the Lord, instead of feeling all the pressure to, I should be happy and I should be so thrilled with my Christian life. that little bit of depression sometimes will cause you to sit down, cry out to the Lord, Lord, this is just how I feel right now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think he may not even say anything. He might be that friend that just sits, that just listens.
It's that kind of, I don't know if you like that video or not, Sunday night, that concept of good. Mm-hmm. Are you depressed? Good.
Yeah.
Are you struggling? Good. Are you, because if you can, in the end, process that, let God be the filter of those things, good will come out of it. So, obviously if you're in depression and you have nowhere to go and, but obviously it may be if you're depressed, but then you let God begin to weave himself into that scenario, good can come out of that, et cetera.
And I don't, we've talked about it on here before, but I don't make light of depression either, because I'm talking about a depression that might be good in the sense that it's a temporary, I'm depressed about a situation and I just need the Lord to minister to me. There are people who are clinically depressed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You were just talking about needing medication and therapy, and we don't look at people's mental health because we just think we are in control of our mental health. So we think, oh, you shouldn't see a doctor, you shouldn't see a psychiatrist, you shouldn't have counseling and all those things. You should just be happy. And I was raised in that culture. If you heard somebody was taking a sleeping pill or an antidepressant, oh my goodness, that was a horrible thing. But and then we get caught in the backwash of a recent victory. How can I top this? That was the greatest sermon I've ever heard. That was, and again, that could feel good. Somebody comes up to you, man, I've never thought of that. That's the best sermon I've ever heard. Mm-hmm. Well, now what are you going to do next week?
Right, yeah.
LeBron James, that was an awesome moment, and the confetti and I hate to say it, but the champagne and all the things that they do in that celebration.
Jared and Raymond and I got some of that sparkling cider and just sprayed it all over ourselves. I
thought you guys were a little sticky the other. But anyway, the greatest miracle I've ever seen, the greatest worship we ever had, the greatest revival I've ever seen. Yep. And how do you top that depression that comes from the letdown of those things coming to an end? So speaking of coming to an end, we probably should do that now. So,
ladies and gentlemen, Dr. R.B. Maynard, verse by verse, we're now in a new chapter.
Yeah.
1 Kings chapter 19. Read that and join us each and every week. Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Watch us on Facebook Live. You can watch us on Grace Point Daily YouTube channel. Anyway, we'll talk to you guys next time.